back to the rematch that was Johnny Fischer versus Dave Allen. Controversial circumstances that surrounded the first fight, which led into the rematch, and it was a conclusive ending. No controversy surrounding this one. Johnny Fischer was, it seemed, winning on my scorecard, 4-0 up on the fight. A lot of people ringside were arguing 4-0, 3-1, that sort of thing. But Johnny seemed to be on the back foot and boxing well until Dave Allen was able to close the gap and turn the fight and the tide right on its head. And he finished it and didn't leave any room for any doubt, becoming the victor over Johnny Fischer. Danny, your thoughts on that fight? What did you think of it?
Yeah, I agree with your assessment, Damon. I actually had given Johnny Fischer all four of the first four rounds, although there was a case to be made for Dave for a couple of them, which wasn't the case back in Saudi Arabia. Fischer won the first four rounds convincingly. So, from a Johnny Fischer point of view, you're probably concerned at the success Dave Allen was having early in the fight. There was just nothing on Johnny Fischer's punches to give Dave Allen anything to worry about. He was clearly very concerned about gassing, didn't put any steam on any of his punches, but was allowed Dave to have success. And by the midway through the fourth round, I was fairly confident Dave was going to win the fight. And yeah, once he had Johnny going, I just actually watched Dave's breakdown on his own channel. And he said, I didn't feel fitter, I didn't feel quicker. I did notice the extra weight, but I felt my timing and sharpness was the things I'd gained from the first fight. And that's why he felt he was able to close the show and closed it in brutal fashion. And going forward, you wonder, what was Johnny Fischer's ceiling before? It's probably less than that now after that knockout, after that first fight. So a lot of thinking to do, a real rebuild needed there if he is to go on to even British title level, you would say. But you have to be happy for Dave Allen. You'll testify to this, Eamon. In boxing, you wouldn't meet anyone with a bad word to say about either of these fellas. But given what's happened in the first fight, the controversy around it, it's hard not to be happy for Dave. And there's going to be some big nights in store for him for sure.
Do you not see any improvements in Johnny Fischer, at least in terms of back foot boxing, something that we don't really attribute to Johnny, who was able to exhibit that in this fight? Of course, it ended in a much brutal and inside the finish distance than the first fight did with Johnny on the front foot. But were you not at least impressed by that he's got that string in his bow?
I didn't see any improvements personally. Even Johnny, I watched an interview, I think it was with IFL after the fight, and he was even saying then, I think the game plan was wrong. I didn't feel comfortable doing going on the back foot. And, Johnny's a naturally athletic kid. He's got that rugby background, so he will have the ability to get up on his toes. But against a fighter with, Dave Allen's an intelligent fighter in that ring, certainly at that level, well beyond the two. And I think with Johnny, his attributes are his power. He's got quite good hand speed. He's not going to be a back foot fighter. And as I said at the start, I thought he was having more success early in the first fight. I mean, some of the commentary saying that Johnny was landing more and heavier shots on Dave than he was in the first fight. I didn't see that at all. I thought Johnny looked better in the first fight. I'm not sure, what was being worked on in the gym turned someone who's came to the sport as late as Johnny has into someone who's going to be able to outbox Dave Allen in the back foot for 10 rounds. I never thought that was likely. I didn't think that made sense. So Johnny's obviously made massive improvements from when he first came into professional boxing. That goes without saying, but I didn't see any huge steps forward between the first fight between himself and Dave and on Saturday night, no.
Speaking to Jamie Moore in the aftermath and asking him his opinion, now that I guess the dust has just started settling on the fight, it was the immediate aftermath of it. And I said to him, from a trainer's perspective, can anyone really turn the tide or the gap of the mountain that they have to climb in terms of experience over in 5 months to make it more of a level playing field? And he kind of said that they didn't think that they would take the rematch. And that's a testament to Johnny Fischer and his family and the want to need to silence any doubts as well too, but also maybe a little bit from the team to they maybe should have slowed things down and looked for a different route for Johnny. But I was impressed with the way he spoke afterwards and the way he kind of spoke about, I guess, being a man and having to take this fight. And there was no real other option for him, and he had to kind of stand headstrong in amongst all those doubts. So I thought he spoke really well, focusing on Fischer for the moment, as opposed to when we move over to Dave. Of Fischer's level, what would you do in terms of the rebuild? What path does he have to go through if he wants to get to a British level and further?
It's a tricky one because do you remember when Campbell Hatton had that really contentious decision on the AJ Usyk card, the first fight, and Eddie took him away, boxed him in the smaller shows, really low down and undercards. But boxing in this country is in a different position now, and Johnny Fisher commercially is a different prospect entirely to Campbell Hatton. So with what Eddie's UK stable is, I'm not sure he can afford to do that. Johnny's still going to be one of his big ticket sellers, so I think a rebuild is 100% needed, but you can't afford to be, you know, for too long anyway, boxing him over in America, boxing him in Europe, although they don't really do the European shows anymore, where you're not maximizing on that ticket selling ability that he does have. Maybe Australia, Big John is, I think, a bigger name in Australia than he is here, so potentially a fight against the local Australian could do well, but before too long, he's going to come back to the headline and shows. I mean, he sold what 6,000, 7,000 tickets off his own back the weekend. There's very few fighters in the country who can do that, and a bit of a blessing and a curse for him. I think a rebuild's needed before you even go back in some of the what would be described as area English level fighters. I mean, we talked before privately about a fight between himself and Nick Webb. That's a 50-50 fight for me, and that's one that even needs building towards. And then conversations with about the likes of David Adelaide and Fraser Clark's light years off at this stage, but it's going to be interesting how they manage him. Remember Eddie done an interview, I think, after Campbell Hatton's second loss to Jimmy Joe Flint, where he said, "I'm only interested in fighters who can go on to become world champions." Although I don't think you'll have that same rhetoric for someone who's as big a ticket seller as Johnny. I think there's always going to be opportunities there, that side of things, but they do need to be careful, and they do need to, you know, have a real look at things and going forward.
Yeah, that is it. Like you said, the blessing and the curse side. The curse side is you want to move that train as fast as possible and build it and take it wider than just the local area which Johnny serves, and that's giving him the opportunity to take fights over to America. Saw him on the Conor Bennett undercard in Vegas, and then Australia, like you said, there maybe has a bigger catchment because of John Fisher's wider appeal on the TikTok and such, creating those comedy bits of content. But also the blessing side of it now that he's had that defeat, two defeats in some people's book, but one on the ledger. That means that he still sells tickets, and Eddie, with the stable where it is right now, needs someone to sell tickets, and those in that sort of area in London, which is generally an area which sells sort of well within the boxing world in the UK. You fill it out with local talent like he did this week with George Lillard, Jimmy Sains, Matchroom talent as well that are at the Tony Sims gym. You can still build a good, decent card and keep that train rolling. So I would tend to think that Johnny Fisher would get more chances off the back of it. But like you mentioned there, probably has to be a little bit matched. And I do think as well, outside of the business side of things too, I do feel that Eddie does have I think Eddie gets a bit of a tough time being a bit like cold and calculated and maybe a bit not as well, I say it's maybe soulless in terms of some of his fighters. I think that's a little bit too far, but I do think he does like Johnny Fisher Percy, so we'll try as much as possible to get him back and earning money where he can. Moving on to Dave Allen, though, he's the one that had his hands raised, and he said, like you mentioned, those interviews, IFL didn't get a chance to speak to him. Unfortunately, Dave would have loved to, but he mentioned that he felt it was very easy for him. He had perforated eardrum, he said, but apart from that, he, I guess, felt that he'd beaten him before he'd even stepped into the ring. And I think we were saying this off camera as well. We were talking like there's a lot of, even at different levels, and a lot of people like to disparage the levels when it comes to Dave Allen fights or Johnny Fisher fights. But even at this level, the mind games was evident to see throughout the build up. Both were trying to verbally disarm each other and kind of say we're happy to be here in a way, and we're not up to much, and we're never going to get to this level, that level. And you got Mark Tibbs who's talking about it's about the fucking money and all that sort of stuff. All a battle to sort of disarm and say, yeah, we're not up to much here. And then when you get into the ring, you reap those rewards. Didn't really work for Fisher, but always, or at least it did work for Dave Allen. Anyways, he had felt that he'd made that or put that win in his column before they even touched gloves. But Dave did get that win. What does he do next? I put out on social media that I think Joe Joyce might be the type of fight that he gets into. Danny, what do you think?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. The world is Dave Allen's oysters now. Matchroom's latest signing, let us not forget to mention that. Eddie's talking about taking him back to Sheffield and Doncaster, so that'll have eased the pain Eddie I felt from Johnny getting beat, I'm sure. It depends what Dave wants. He's talked about how winning the British title would be a dream. Obviously, we expect that rematch between David Adelaide and Jimmy TKV to take place before that conversation can be had. And the other side, there's going to be big money fights for him beyond traditional British title level. So he's going to decide And I would get the feeling Dave will take the most financially lucrative fights for him at this stage of his career. Joe Joyce has been mentioned. I saw Derek Chisora mentioned, Dylan White mentioned. Even though all three of those are in the latter stages of their career, to say the least, I still think levels are not something that can be ignored, and I would still have all three a level or two above Dave Allen. Dylan White one's an interesting one potentially only because of where Dylan White's punch resistance might be. Dave Allen, what he is, he's incredibly durable. He's got good ring IQ and he can punch. Dylan White would be superior than him in every aspect bar those three. But the question marks over where his chin are make an interesting fight for me. But yeah, it comes down to what Dave wants. He'll be able to get that British title shot, I'm sure. If he wants that, he'll probably be able to get more financially lucrative fights that he'd be a bigger underdog into if that's the direction he wants to go in. But yeah, from where he was, man, fighting, four rounders and Dennis Hobson shows to, in his own words, swallowing it against Fraser Clark, looking by all metrics a finished fighter. To where he is now, yeah, it arguably you could say his profile has not been higher, so it's gonna be a big fight regardless. Back into this year, I would say.